This video was brought to you by my loyal patrons. Pledge today and you can participate in choosing what video comes to the channel next. Link in the description. Hello all! Today I bring you a very special installment of Sodor Explained. A video that has been in the making for over a year now. The complete TV map of the island of Sodor, based entirely on the map as drawn by Thomas & Friends OG model series director himself, David Mitten. There is a huge map of the island of Sodor that the series creator Wilbert Awdry crafted, and this is the map that everyone, including myself, universally accepts as the truest one. However, this map only pertains to the book's universe, and the TV series clearly did its own thing entirely. Early last year, I made a huge in-depth video going over a map of the island of Sodor I had made myself, piecing together every location in the TV series. I was very happy with that map at the time, but it is outdated now. I made a follow-up video going over some updates I had made to it, and since then, I've just kind of left it. Until now, the location of everything was really up to anyone's interpretation, as no official documentation of everything had been revealed at that time. Then, like magic, earlier this year, a bunch of behind-the-scenes assets and documents were leaked from the original show, including hand-drawn maps that David Mitten himself had created. For the first time ever, we had official confirmation on the locations of almost everything. Everything important, anyway. The map was created on a grid, and locations were determined using the letter and number coordinates. Several pieces of concept art have map codes on them to show where they are on the grid. So, naturally, I have dived deep into research on Mitten's map, using everything I can to place every location. And I mean every location, every set. During my research, I discovered a couple things. First is, David Mitten clearly did not use Wilbert Awdry's map as a base. He did his own thing, drawing lines all over the place in an attempt to connect everything. He really did have his own headcanon, his own vision for the series, adding things like a shipwreck point and fierce seas and Black Lock on his version of Sodor. Second is the routes of every episode do not perfectly line up with this map. The map unfortunately raises more questions than it answers, and I do question some of the logic of the line placements. Episodes like Percy's Promise don't really make sense looking at this map, as the tracks that go through the Floodlands go past Elsbridge, when Elsbridge was the station he ended up at, etc. Point is, even Mitten's own map isn't perfect, and it's important to keep that in mind. And lastly, I firmly, wholeheartedly believe that they stopped adding new locations to the map in Season 5. Of course, the episodes that don't deal with any new locations seem to stick to it, like Busy Going Backwards, for example. Toad breaks loose on Gordon's Hill, they go through Wellsworth, then Crosby, and finally derail somewhere after that. That checks out, but all the new locations don't seem to have any sort of definitive placement. The most damning piece of evidence of this is that none of the Season 5 concept art has map codes. I really don't think they used a map after Season 4, and that was probably because Season 5 was so crazy adventurous that they didn't want to be confined with location execs, etc. And I don't think the rest of the series stuck to a map either, especially those hit model seasons. I don't think a map was used at all until the Brenner Renaissance seasons in 2013, when they started using a revised version of the Wilbert Awdry map as a base. This HD recreation of the map I'm about to share with you, I tried to make as close as possible to Mitten's own vision. Before we begin, let me go over a few rules that I abided by when putting this together. Number 1. This map is only covering locations from Seasons 1 through 4, as I firmly believe that they didn't use the map for Season 5 onwards. I am also focusing on only the west side of Sodor, as the whole east side seems to be a bit of a clusterfuck. Apparently the Skarloey Railway is a giant loop, and the mid-Sodor runs through the middle of it. It's just a whole mess. So I decided not to deal with that. We're only focusing on everything to the west of Marin, and that's not a big deal because the majority of the series takes place on that side of Sodor anyway. Number 2. Mitten's map was the primary source of information, with map codes from the concept art we do have being secondary. Of course, not every single set is marked on his map, so I used the rule of deduction to determine the rest of the locations based on their placements in episodes, and a teeny bit of headcanon to fill in the gaps. Number 3. I have tweaked the map slightly from Mitten's original drawing. Of course, the drawing is not exact, so we do have some leeway, but I did clean up some of those extra lines and move some locations slightly, so they make a little bit more realistic sense, while keeping the general idea of their placements in mind. I'll go more into detail about my rationale for the things I've changed as we go through the map. And number 4. Every single set from seasons 1 through 4 is on this map. That is not an exaggeration. Every single applicable set is on this map. I actually went in and counted every set from each season and made a checklist to make sure I covered everything. In Season 1, there were 51 sets. In Season 2, not counting repeats, there were 33. Season 3 introduced 50, and there are 11 from Season 4 we can use. Subtracting these 10 sets, which are either on the east side of Sodor, or are too non-definitive to pinpoint their locations, that gives us a grand total of 135 sets to place on this map. And I will be keeping track of all of them in the ticker in the corner of the screen as we go. Alrighty, that was a crap ton of information. Now let's get to the part that you are all waiting for, the map itself. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the official TV map of the island of Sodor. Let's begin. So, as always, we will start our journey across Sodor via the main line. The main line, as we all know, starts at Knapford, aka the big station. So we'll begin there. Behind Knapford is the shunting yard, as depicted in the concept art from Season 2. The shunting yards has many different areas, including this main area, this yard where Duck pranked Diesel, this part of the yard where Percy crashed into a luggage cart, this large yard where James and Gordon tricked Thomas, and this crazy set where Thomas rolled down a hill into a brick wall. It's kind of impossible to show all the yards on this map, so use your imagination to decipher where they are within this little bubble. Behind the yards is Knapford Sheds. These sheds have not been seen since Season 1, and I like to think that they are abandoned now. It was at these sheds that Gordon ran off the turntable into a ditch. To the left of the sheds is Knapford Docks, the main dockyard for the main line. The Flying Kipper begins its journey here. Stone from the Farquhar quarries on Thomas's branch line is also brought here, and loaded into barges like Bulstrode. Slightly to the left of the station is a small junction to the old lead mines. The lead mines are along a single road line that travels near the sea, past this lonely cottage and to the workings itself. It was here that Thomas fell into a disused mine. Heading back to the main station, we'll now start our journey. So on my original map, I had Knapford facing north to make some sense of the mainline trains going through Tidmouth. That was actually incorrect, as Mitten's map does show Knapford facing south. At the station throat, there is a large signal gantry. On the other side of the gantry is the junction for Thomas's branch line. But we'll of course keep traveling straight. Beyond that is the first signal box. Thomas was stopped here by the signalman after he accidentally left his train behind. The line curves east after that, and past this set with these trees in the foreground. We travel along a bit of a straightaway until finally reaching Henry's Tunnel. The up and center tracks go through the north portal, and the down track goes through the south one, aka the portal that Henry was shut up in. On the other side of the tunnel, there is a little river on the south side of the line. The line forms a bit of an S-curve, and we go past the area where Donald and Douglas saved Henry from a snowdrift. Beyond that is the field where James was stopped after he tore a hole in one of his coach's brake pipes. It's a long run of straight line after that, and it's along this stretch that Edward chased a runaway James down. Under the road bridge, and we begin the approach to Crosby. There is a small yard on the south side. and it was in these sightings that Duck crashed into the barbershop. As can be seen from this shot, the ocean can be seen in the south in the distance. Up ahead is the junction for the loop line, and I've gone ahead and placed the overhead signal box we see only in a single shot from Season 3 here. I'm going to pause from the main line for a minute to explain the loop line. So the loop line is something that has been debated for a long time. It is mentioned in Season 1.
No, it was lost for me. I was switched off the main line onto the loop. I had to go all round and back again.
But how it works has always been a mystery. I've speculated on how this loop might have worked before in my CGI series map video, and the Mitten map does pretty much confirm that as true. When mainline trains, particularly the Express, leaves for the east, it departs Knapford heading south, going through Crosby. On the return journeys, it doesn't go through Crosby. It instead takes the loop line and swings through Elsbridge and Tidmouth, and then comes into Knapford through the rear of the station. This is supported in several episodes when we see Gordon finishing a journey and he enters Knapford from the rear.
Whenever Gordon finished one journey, it was time for another to begin. Never mind, he puffed. I like a good long run to stretch my wheels.
Let's travel along the loop line. The loop line, at least this portion of it, is 2 tracks. There is a large bend, and it was here at this field that James had his famous crash. There is another junction that heads north. It goes under this large valley bridge and connects up with the branch line to Tidmouth Harbor. So this is one of the changes I made from Mitten's map. Mitten's map shows the line to Tidmouth Harbor literally going straight to the harbor, as well as this other track from Thomas's branch here that also goes to the harbor. It just seems like an unnecessary amount of tracks, so I made the main line connection connect up to Thomas's line here. This way, the track still goes to the same location, it cuts down on unnecessary tracks, and it explains why we've sometimes seen mainline engines traveling past places on Thomas's branch line, like the watermill. Okay, back to the loop. The loop line travels under this road bridge and then enters Elsbridge, the big junction station for Thomas's branch. The track layout for Elsbridge is very confusing, but basically after the station, the main line crosses over the branch line, and then the loop continues on and becomes a single track after Elsbridge and goes through the floodlands. It was in this area that Percy got stuck in the flood, traveling to Elsbridge coming from the other direction. This is another change I made for Mitten's map. Mitten's map shows that unnecessary line to the harbor was the track Percy got flooded on. But that doesn't really make any sense because 1, that track doesn't come from Tidmouth Halt, and it goes past Elsbridge, the place that Percy was going to. Like I said before, his map ain't perfect, so I tweaked it to make the loop line this line. The line goes past this raised area above these flower fields and gains its second track again as it approaches Tidmouth. Loops around Tidmouth sheds and into the station yard. Tidmouth is another big station where 3 different lines come together. The main line, Thomas's branch, and the Little Western. In the yard here are sheds for the branch line engines, and the railway's main coaling plant. The turntable that Oliver fell into is somewhere in the yards here. The main line gains its 3 tracks again and heads south for Knapford. There's a bit of a stretch of track before passing through Lower Tidmouth and onwards. Some while after Lower Tidmouth is the stretch of main line near a windmill that Toby ran out of water on. After this bit, the line converges into 2 lines and passes under the bridge from the show's intro sequence. This feels very wrong to me. This absolutely feels like it should be a location on Thomas's branch line. However, it is marked not only on the Season 3 map, but also on the other maps that Mitten drew up. This one from Season 1 even explicitly says the 3 lines merged to 2 lines after Lower Tidmouth. So, there you go. Before reaching the River Callan, we reach the station of Callan. Callan is a bit of a weird station because the building itself is modeled after Arlesborough West in the books, and Duck and Oliver are shown at it multiple times. So it seems like it would be somewhere on the Little Western. And then according to the episode Mind That Bike, it appears to be somewhere in relation to Thomas's branch line. Also, random mainline trains have been shown to pass through it. So I've placed it here, where the 3 lines come together again before entering Knapford, appropriately right on the River Callan. Through Callan we go, and the 2 tracks travel above the shunting yard, as seen here, and into Knapford Station, completing the loop. What an ordeal. So now that the loop is explained, let's resume the main line. Beyond the junction for the loop line, we pass over this small girder bridge, and it was here Henry and Gordon were halted by a rather angry cow. The main line approaches the viaduct. The 3 roads merge into 2 here, and then become 3 again after. After the viaduct is Henry's Forest. This is also a slight change from Mitten's map. Mitten has the forest placed before the viaduct, before the junction to the loop in fact. This doesn't line up with the episodes. In Gordon and the Famous Visitor, Gordon is shown going through Wellsworth coming from the other direction, then goes through the forest, and then goes over the viaduct. The forest placement does not align on Mitten's map, so I went and rectified that, now placing it between the viaduct and Wellsworth. On the outskirts of the forest are the ruins of an old castle that Duck shot past when being chased by the runaway trucks. We then enter Wellsworth, the junction station for Edward's branch line. There's a small station yard here, and it was here that Bill and Ben played their trick on Boko. Wellsworth does switch directions after Season 1, but we'll just write that up to set inconsistency. Heading along the main line, we cross over the level crossing right before Sudbury Junction, and begin the ascend up Gordon's Hill. Gordon's Hill is made up of a series of curves and winds. A total of 4 sets were used for it in Season 1, so I've gone and reflected all of those. At the bottom of the hill is where the first curve starts under this road bridge. It curves north again and the main ascend begins. James lost his trucks here once, and also slipped on leaves here. It curves again once we reach the peak. The trucks pushed Thomas here. It curves one more time as it begins the main descend, past this lonely little cottage, over this bridge above the road, and towards Maron. Before Maron there is a junction for a second line to Brendam. I, in all honesty, really hate this. It's just some lame line that exists to explain the inconsistency of Percy going over the hill and ending up at Lower Sudbury for whatever reason in Season 1. And it's just kind of unrealistic. But it's on the map, and I'm going to try and come up with an explanation for it. As we see in various episodes, mainline engines and trains depart Brendam. I'm going to say this second line provides a more direct route to Maron and the east of the island onwards. And the main track down we're all more familiar with was built specifically for trains coming from the west, and is the one Edward uses for his daily route. It's not a perfect explanation, but I don't think we'll ever have one. Anyways, continuing along the main, we pass by the signal approach to Maron, and into Maron Station itself. Thomas crashed into the buffers here. Beyond Maron is what we call the Void, the part of Sodor that isn't very well documented, and will not be focused on in this video. The Skarloey Railway, Crovan's Gate, and the other railway are all further east, and perhaps we'll cover those in a part 2 or something. So, that is the main line. Certainly the most consistent and easiest to piece together on this map. Let's head into the farmland now and cover Thomas's branch line. So Thomas's branch line is hands down the most confusing line on all the island of Sodor. Because Thomas is the main character of the show, he is shown everywhere at some point, and who's to say what is and isn't actually a part of his line. The Mitten map did help explain some things a little bit, and I've come to the conclusion that Thomas's line is weirdly shaped like this, with its own loop line separate from the mainline one. It's never simple, is it? Let's start at Tidmouth for Thomas's line. Tidmouth sheds and the branch line sheds are both at Tidmouth, obviously, and Thomas has been shown to stay at both. I think it's reasonable to say Thomas's branch line starts at Tidmouth. After departing Tidmouth, the branch line follows the main line for a while, going through Lower Tidmouth, under the intro bridge, then through Callan, and into Knapford through the station's rear. After Knapford, the line splits off from the main line at the junction and becomes 2 tracks. At the junction, next to the branch line, is the bus depot. Bertie the bus lives here. The branch line crosses over the road at the level crossing, and it's here that Birdie was halted for Thomas to pass by. The line then travels past the canals, as seen in Season 3, and approaches Dryaw. Dryaw has an airfield next to the station, and this is where Harold the helicopter lives. After Dryaw, the line continues on straight. After a bend, we pass the area where Thomas derailed on buckled tracks. And beyond that is this wide road bridge that Birdie got ahead of Thomas during their great race. The line bends north after that, and into Elsbridge. Thomas enters the station on the west side, facing north. Elsbridge is a very confusing junction station, and I'll be the first to admit that I don't fully understand the track layout. On the east side of the station is the yard where some sheds are located, and it was in this yard that Percy crashed into a brake van. Departing Elsbridge, Thomas crosses over the main line via a series of points and heads northeast on his branch line. After Elsbridge is a road crossing. Birdie broke down here once, and Thomas took his passengers. The switch to the runaway siding is also located here, which once failed to save Percy. According to this photo of this set, there are tracks behind the crossing. No idea what these tracks are, but I'm going to assume they are connecting tracks to the main line, so trains coming down from the branch line have a more direct means of getting onto the loop line track to Tidmouth, without having to turn around or maneuver in the yard or something. Okay, onwards and upwards. After Elsbridge is the glorious Valley Bridge from Season 3. Thomas's branch line crosses the top, and the main line's connecting line to Tidmouth Harbor runs beneath it. After this bridge is the famous Els Bridge itself that crosses over the River Els. Thomas once went fishing here. I really don't like how far the Els Bridge is from the station of Elsbridge itself, but that's how it is on Mitten's map, so I'm going to try and stay consistent with it. After the bridge is the signal Thomas was halted at after he accidentally left his guard behind. The poor guy had to run quite a ways to catch up with his train, didn't he? The rails meet the road again, and the line becomes a single track after this buffer stop. The rest of Thomas's branch line is single track from this point on. Up ahead is a junction for the line to Tidmouth Harbor. We're going to come back to that in a bit. Through a cutting and over the crossing that Daisy passed a horse and cart at. The line continues to climb as road and rail run alongside each other, over this little canal bridge, and to this signal where Birdie hit a pothole. The road and rail then run neck and neck as Hackenbeck approaches, past Terrence's field, and into the Hackenbeck Tunnel. On the other side of the tunnel is Mrs. Kindly's cottage. It was also on this side of the tunnel that Thomas got stuck in a snowdrift. Hackenbeck Station approaches. There is a junction to a yard before the station, and in this little yard is the stone cutting shed that Mavis brings trucks to from the quarries. On the station side is Daisy's shed. There is a line that jets off right after the station that travels up the tramway to the quarries. Toby and Mavis bring trucks along this line to the stone cutting shed. This track crosses over the main road and often gets slippery in winter. Mavis stuck here once. Following the main branch line, we enter a second tunnel. On the other side is the area where Daisy tried to shoo Champion off the line. Now I always thought that this was Hackenbeck Tunnel, and for all we know, it might be. But going by the logic of Bullseyes, Daisy leaves Hackenbeck for a tunnel ahead of her. But in Train Stop's play, Stepney goes through the actual Hackenbeck tunnel before arriving at Hackenbeck in the same direction. Not to mention, the tunnel portals are different designs in the same season. So screw it, it's a second tunnel entirely. Why not? Pass a series of points up to the quarry, and onwards to Farquhar. Farquhar is the final regular stop on Thomas's branch line. And there is a little yard here, possibly with a little turntable or a Y in it for Thomas to turn around for his return journeys. The line does continue on, though, to Ulfstead. As stated in Thomas and Percy's Christmas adventure, Thomas sometimes travels along this mountainy line on occasion.
If someday you should see Thomas the tank engine puffing happily along the line, he may be on his way to a village nestled deep in the heart of the island of Sodor.
It's not a regular service route. After Farquhar, the line travels into the farmland, past this snowy windmill, and into the mountains. The line gains a second track for trains to pass each other, and crosses this beautiful waterfall bridge. It becomes a single line again, going through this valley cutting, before finally arriving at the mountain town of Ulfstead, the heart of the island of Sodor. Thomas and Percy saved the villagers here once when the town got snowed under on Christmas Eve. The line terminates here. Let's go back to Farquhar and explore that quarry network. As shown on Mitten's map, there are 2 lines that go up to the quarries, and I think I've made sense of them. The first line is the tramway line, which starts at Hackenbeck and is a more direct route to the stone-cutting shed. The second line is the original line, that starts on the Farquhar side, with a Y. The Y allows trains to go down the branch line or go to Farquhar from the quarry. After this is that crossing where Thomas was written up by that grouchy policeman. The line follows the road for a short ways before crossing the river. One of the lines here crosses a bridge that we've never seen, while the other line is abandoned and used an old car ferry to cross this lake. I don't know why a car ferry like this was even built to begin with, when a bridge clearly makes more sense, but whatever. It makes for a cool crash. The line converges with the tramway one and together crosses over the wooden bridge that Toby tightroped on. The tracks curve north, over the level crossing, and to the sidings between both quarries. All the quarry trucks are brought here for engines to collect. Mavis' shed is also here. Going east is the old quarry, as depicted in Season 2. Going west is what's known as Toby's Quarry, aka the quarry shown in Season 3. I always just assumed these were the same quarry, and they just look different, but Mitten's map does indeed mark them as different locations. I guess Mavis works at both of them. Now heading north is a line that connects all the way back up to Toby's old line. This line is never shown in Seasons 1 through 4, but it is on Mitten's map. My assumption is that this line was built to transport rock to Toby's old line when the Fat Controller reopened it, but that of course doesn't happen until Season 5. So that's all of the main branch. Let's head back west a bit and explore that line to Tidmouth Harbor. The line to Tidmouth Harbor forms the loop of Thomas's branch line. As told to us in Season 3, Thomas does travel regularly on it. So departing Tidmouth, the line travels north, past Tidmouth sheds, and then junctions off inland. There is a junction here that goes to the harbor itself. It travels past one of Harold's helipads, under the Little Western, and to the harbor. Thomas and Trevor both helped to rebuild the harbor, and since then, it appears to be in regular use. Continuing along the loop line travels through a thick valley cutting. It converges into a single line and travels through farmland, past this spooky windmill, and into the forest before Crow's Farm crossing. Percy once hit a cart of lime here. The nearby signal box has a siding. The line goes over the beautiful watermill and gains a second track before going past a big farm, over what's called the Lock and Weir on Mitten's map, before entering the goods station. The goods station is for goods from the harbor, obviously, so Thomas doesn't stop here with his regular passenger trains. The tracks bend north and then converge with the main branch line. And there you have it, Thomas's branch line. The most infuriating and confusing line on the whole island. This line is so long, I don't know how one little blue tank engine with 2 coaches suffices it. Let's head west again, and now take a look at Duck's branch line, the Little Western. So recently, fans have been discussing what is the true placement of Duck's branch line. Some suggest it is actually where Edward's branch line is, and runs down to Brendam Docks. There is some evidence of that. Duck and Oliver are seen at Brendam multiple times in Season 3, and Oliver seems to flat out be living at Wellsworth by Season 5. But I'm going to stick with my guns and say that the branch line is still indeed on the west coast, hence its name, the Little Western. The Mitten map also marks Duck's new station, aka Tidmouth Halt, on the west side, so you can't really argue with that. Okay, let's get kind of creative here and start in the middle of the line, at Tidmouth. As shown in various Season 3 episodes, Duck's branch departs Tidmouth. We'll head north first. The line goes past Tidmouth sheds, past the junction for Thomas's loop, and into the Tidmouth tunnel. The line pops out of the tunnel, and then curves into a second tunnel. Then it travels north over Tidmouth Harbor, and continues along the coast past the sandy beaches. It goes all the way up the coastline until finally terminating at the sunny beach station of Haltra. Now I'm not totally sure of this, because Haltra isn't actually marked on Mitten's map. But I think Haltra is the final station on Duck's line. Unless it for some reason keeps going north to Lower Arlesborough, which is the station on Toby's old line. I'm going to say the branch stops here though, and perhaps around that curve north of the station is a small yard with a turntable or something. Who knows? We've only seen Haltra in a single episode, so it's hard to say. The only episode it appears in also calls it a junction station.
At the junction, Duck told Oliver all about him.
Which I guess technically makes sense. It's a junction to Toby's old line. Good enough. Moving on. Let's go back to Tidmouth. The southern part of the line is much more interesting. Heading south of Tidmouth, the line is a part of the main line for a short ways before splitting off to the west along the coast. This single track goes over Bulgy's Bridge, and I think I've finally found a definitive placement for this wacky bridge. The bridge is on Duck's line in Season 3, and then seems to be on Thomas's in Season 4, so there's a bit of a controversy of where it actually is. I'm going to change what I've said before and say that it is on Duck's line, and I've made some sense of it. In Bulgy gets stuck under the bridge while traversing his shortcut to the big station, aka Knapford. Instead of taking the long ways around via Dryaw, he went this way and met the bridge. On the west side of the bridge is the cricket field, and on the east side is the chicken farm where Bulgy was laid up as a henhouse. After the bridge, the line gains a second track and meets the coast. It goes past the small seaside village station that Toby once ventured to. Around the corner of the cliff is Bulstrode's Beach. And this is perfect because you can clearly see the northern part of Tidmouth across the bay entrance in the distance. The line goes into more cliffside tunnels, through that fun rock tunnel, over the bridge that Dilly waves to the engines at, into a third tunnel, and popping out at Tidmouth Halt. To the east of the station is a small yard and sheds for the engines. Mitten's map marks Tidmouth Halt as the end of the line, and that definitely seems to be the case in Season 3, as the line just sort of ends at the buffer stops. But keeping in mind that the station and the line was brand new in Season 3, perhaps we can assume the line wasn't completely finished yet. The line continues along the coast and past the little halt for Knapford Beach. The second track ends at that buffer stop and becomes single again. Past the lighthouse and the flowery fields into Callan, where we link up with the main line again, and finally into Knapford, where the line terminates. It's so hard to decipher what is and isn't a part of the Little Western, as Duck and Oliver are frequently shown on other places on the island. Not to mention the amount of times Thomas is incorrectly on what actually is Duck's line. They really do play fast and loose with where the engines work in the TV series. And I get it. Limiting engines to only one part of the island restricts story potential, and it allows us to see our main character in some of the coolest looking parts of the island of Sodor. Let's head south now, and check out Edward's Branch. As we all know, Edward's branch line veers off the main line after Wellsworth. So we'll start there. So after Wellsworth, the line travels east along the main, and then diverts south at Sudbury Junction. Right below the junction is this lonely little siding that Percy once shunted some trucks into. After that is Croc's Scrapyard, where Edward first met Trevor. The scrapyard changes directions in Season 3, with the big shed building facing south instead of north. No idea why they changed that. Just below the scrapyard is the Vicarage Orchard, and it is here where Trevor now happily lives, and Edward sometimes stops here to catch up with him. Beyond the orchard is an open bit of line, and it is around here that Edward broke his crank pin. After that is the hayfields. It's here that Percy collected hay and took to Tidmouth for Toby to take up Thomas's branch line to the farms. As we start to approach Sudbury, the two tracks converge into a single line. And here we pass under the 3 bridges. Yes, this is where I am placing this seemingly impossible to figure out location. This is the only place on the map where 2 lines cross over each other like this. And it only works if we assume the top bridge is only a road bridge. The bottom track is the branch line coming from Wellsworth, and the middle bridge is the 2-road branch coming from Marin. I imagine this will be a bit of a controversial placement, but it's the only place I think that makes any sense. God damn you, David Mitten, and your desire to make really visually appealing sets with no logic of how they would work on this completely fictional island geographically. Curse you! The line continues a bit and gains its second track again after this buffer stop. It was here Percy, bringing a fruit train up from Brendam, missed the faulty points and crashed. Not too far from this location is where Percy collected that fruit train from James, who broke down at this old logging halt. Under another road bridge we go as the line traverses this bendy S-curve and into Sudbury Station. Sudbury is never seen on screen, but we do see the station sightings. It was at these sightings that Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle were resting at when a rather overexcited James passed by them.
What was all that about? That was trouble.
And below Sudbury is the fishing village, specifically the one from Season 3. This is a very unexpected location that everyone, including myself, assumed was somewhere on Duck's Line on the west coast, but nope. As confirmed by the concept art, it is in Sudbury here in the marina. The Mitten map places it below Lower Sudbury, but I've moved it slightly above to make sense of it at the river mouth near Sudbury Bay. The line continues to travel south, and eventually the branch line from Marin links up with it, just before Lower Sudbury. There is a small yard here, and it is here Percy had his frightening encounter with a dragon. After Lower Sudbury, the line converges to a single track again. It climbs up a hill, crossing over the road via this girder bridge, and then slides down the other side into Upper Brendam. Upper Brendam has a large marshalling yard where goods from the docks are sorted into trains. Bill and Ben worked here for a short time, and got into a spat about the turntable. The standpipe that Gordon once took water on is a part of this set, although I think in the context of that episode, the set was meant to be Tidmouth.
What's this? Educating Gordon Day?
Now I always assumed this yard was some unseen part of Wellsworth, but you can see the station building of Upper Brendam here in the background of this shot. And the concept art for Upper Brendam depicts a big yard with a turntable. So hey, what do you know? After Upper Brendam, the line crosses over the river via this 3-sectioned girdered bridge and approaches Brendam. Brendam Station is in the harbor towards the rear, as you can see here. Brendam Docks itself is huge, one of the biggest ports on the island next to Knapford. There are many different sets that make up Brendam, including the big main one from seasons 2 and 3, this area where the big ships are unloaded, these sidings looking out to the sea, and this series of canals. It's gigantic, and like the various shunting yards at Knapford, are kinda hard to accurately portray in such a small space. So again, just use your imagination to decipher where they are within this little bubble. Beyond Brendam Docks is the line to the China Clay Pits. As the Mitten map shows, there are 2 quarries in the area. One is labeled Clay Mines, and the other is just New Quarry. Just like the 2 quarries on Thomas's branch line, I'm going to assume Clay Mines is referring to the Season 2 pits, and New Quarry is referring to the different clay pits we see later in Season 3. The line to the Season 2 clay pits goes away from the sea and under this little abandoned wooden bridge. The Season 2 pits are somewhat small, so I guess that's why they expanded later. The larger clay pits we see in Season 3 are a bit more expansive, and also was destroyed in a rock slide, so that's fun. The newer line to the new clay pits goes past the sea and links back up to the original near the docks, creating a full loop. And that covers all of Edward's branch line. We still have one line on the island to cover, and that is Toby's old line. So let's head north. As the song states, Toby once worked on an old line in the north of Sodor. It seems the line has taken the place of the Arlesdale Miniature Railway on Audrey's map, going to places such as Arlesborough, Marthwaite, and Arlesdale. However, it is quite a bit more expansive. Within the first 4 seasons, there is literally only one episode that shows us footage of this line, so we're not going to have much footage to use for this. The episode states that Toby collects trucks from the farms and factories and takes them to the main line.
He takes trucks from farms and villages to the main line.
So I suppose he actually went down to Tidmouth? It's a bit muddy. A lot of it is left up to interpretation. It's hard to decipher where exactly the line starts, so we'll start at the end of the line, Arlesdale End. Arlesdale End, as the name implies, is the end of the line. The tracks do not go past the station and terminate at Toby's shed. Coming from Arlesdale, the tracks meet a junction that heads south to the quarries at Farquhar. As we discussed earlier, perhaps this line was built later as an easier means of transporting rocks to the old line after the Fat Controller reopened it. We really don't have much more to go off of here. The line travels around a large lake and crosses the river mouth via a trestle bridge. It then weaves through the mountains and valleys, past the ruins of Castle Arl. The line stops at Marthwaite, which is never seen on screen. It's totally possible that the Maithwaite we see in Season 5 is actually meant to be this station, and the name was a misspelling. It would also explain why it appears to be Toby's favorite station.
My favourite station is Farquhar, said Thomas. Mine's Maithwaite, said Toby.
From Marthwaite, there is another line that goes north, and as marked on Mitten's map, it heads up to the Black Lock regions. Black Lock, of course, doesn't make its debut in the series until way later in Season 7, so it's super fascinating that it was a thing all the way back in the early seasons, and we just never saw it. After Marthwaite, the line continues west, passing through Upper Arlesborough, which we never see, and then Arlesborough Town, which we also never see, and finally Lower Arlesborough, which we actually have seen on screen. It was at this station that Toby met the Fat Controller and his family for the first time. Beyond Lower Arlesborough is a long stretch of track that passes over flat marshland, and it is here that the ever-classic windmill from the show's intro sequence is located. As blasphemous as it is to admit, that famous windmill is not on Thomas's branch line. It's on Toby's old line. I feel like I've been lied to my entire life. This long stretch of track does hook up to the Northwestern Railway at Haltraw, where Duck's branch line begins. And that, everyone, is the island of Sodor. All 135 locations placed on a single map. Is it perfect? Nah, of course not. And I'm sure some people will probably disagree with the placements of some locations, particularly the Three Bridges set, and that's totally fine. Part of the fun of this is that a lot of this is completely up to interpretation, and that just adds to Thomas's never-ending timelessness. Now, as always, let's check through some episodes and make sure these new routes all check out. Ready? And go! Edward, Gordon, and Henry. Gordon departs Knapford with the express. He goes past the signal box after the junction, along this straightaway, and breaks down at the tunnel. Henry and Edward take the train, past the river, past the bootlace field, and all the way along the main line to Wellsworth. Thomas and the trucks. Thomas departs Knapford with the trucks. He goes through Henry's tunnel, past the bootlace field, and then is shown making the cross over Gordon's Hill. He runs down the other side, over the road bridge, past the signal approach to Maron, and coming to a stop at Maron. There is one out-of-place POV shot of him going through Elsbridge, which we'll just chalk up to a piece of B-roll being edited into the final cut. James and the coaches. Edward and James begin their journey from Knapford and take the route along Thomas's branch, stopping at Dryaw. They then stop at Elsbridge, and somehow switch directions along the loop line, passing James's accident field. Much later, they are shown crossing Gordon's Hill, and then rest at Maron. Thomas and Bertie. Thomas and Bertie start their race at the bus depot. Thomas draws ahead at the level crossing. He stops at Dryaw. Bertie draws ahead on the wide road bridge before Elsbridge. They both stop at Elsbridge. Then they both cross over the River Els. The track becomes single at the buffer stop. Thomas draws ahead near Terrence's field and plunges into the tunnel. He pulls into Farquhar and wins the race. There are some random shots from other locations on the island that are spliced in, such as this one of Thomas going through Lower Arlesborough of all places, and this B-roll of him going under the intro bridge. Percy runs away. Percy shunts some trucks into the lonely siding beyond Wellsworth. He nearly gets hit by Gordon and races off along the main line. He goes up and over Gordon's Hill, then gets switched onto the Marin line of Edwards Branch, which is 2 tracks. He arrives at Lower Sudbury where he finally comes to a stop. Whistles and sneezes. Henry hauls a stopping train under the intro bridge and some boys throw stones at him. He completes his journey at Tidmouth and switches directions for the return journey. By the time he reaches Lower Tidmouth, he's built up plenty of ash. He goes under the intro bridge again from the other direction and blows his ash at the naughty boys. Dirty objects. James collects trucks at Knapford, then goes along Thomas's line to Elsbridge to collect the rest. He heads down the loop line, passing the field he once crashed in. He then makes the crossing over Gordon's Hill, where he is pushed down the other side by the trucks. He passes the signal approach, and finally crashes at Maron. Down the mine. Thomas leaves Gordon at Lower Tidmouth. He passes under the intro bridge and arrives at Knapford. He leaves Annie and Clarabelle there, and then travels down the line to the lead mine to collect trucks. Cows. Gordon races through Wellsworth and then crosses the viaduct. He stops at the girder bridge before heading up the loop line due to a cow on his line. Henry, coming from the other direction, stops at the bridge, is frightened by the cow, and reverses along the main line from where he just came, back to Crosby. Bertie's chase. Edward departs Wellsworth and turns right onto his branch line at Sudbury Junction. He stops at Lower Sudbury and continues on. The line becomes single track. He crosses over the girder bridge, and the coaches complain as he rolls down the steep hill. He comes to a stop at Upper Brendam, and then continues on his way to Brendam. Old Iron. James leaves Knapford shunting yards and runs through Knapford and out onto the open line. Edward catches up to him, and they race along the straightaway before Crosby, under the road bridge, and finally coming to a stop at Crosby. A close shave. Duck and Edward depart Wellsworth and haul a train up Gordon's Hill. The train breaks away and chases Duck down the hill, past Sudbury Junction, through Wellsworth, past the ruined castle, over the viaduct, and to Crosby. Duck swerves into the yard and crashes into the barber shop. Edward's exploit. Edward leaves Knapford with his train. He takes it all the way down his branch, passing through Lower Sudbury. He meets Bill and Ben at Brendam, who take his enthusiast to the clay pits under this old wooden bridge. They return to the docks, and Edward heads back up his line. He navigates this S-curve, and then breaks down between Sudbury and Wellsworth. He gets the train going again, goes through Crosby, and finally arrives back at Knapford. Ghost Train. Percy departs Tidmouth Harbor at night and goes through the valley cutting. He passes the spooky windmill in the foresty area of the branch, crashes at Crow's Farm Crossing, and then meets Toby at the signal box. Toby leaves and crosses the watermill, and then they both take some crazy route back to Tidmouth off screen, but that doesn't really matter. Percy's Promise. Percy departs Tidmouth Halt with Annie and Clarabelle, albeit in the wrong direction. He's going into the yards here. He travels through Tidmouth off screen, past the flower field, and through the floodlands, where he gets caught in a flood. He makes it through and rounds the bend into Elsbridge. Thomas gets bumped. At the very beginning of the episode, the narrator says Thomas passes the watermill, then a big farm, and then through a goods station that he doesn't stop at. On a later journey, he is stopped at the goods station to help get the children home, and takes them all the way up the line to meet Bertie at the next station, which is Hackenbeck. Trust Thomas. Thomas leaves Toby's quarry and crosses over the tightrope bridge. He travels on the line towards Farquhar, and gets sent on the abandoned track by accident where he collides with the old car ferry. Toby's tightrope. Mavis sorts Toby's trucks at the main sidings between the quarries. Toby collects them and sets off down the line. The trucks push him at the crossing, down the line, and he finally halts on the collapsing tightrope bridge. Bulgy. Bulgy leaves Tidmouth with Duck's passengers along his shortcut to the big station, aka Knapford. He turns right onto his shortcut, over the main line off screen, and then gets stuck under the road bridge on Duck's line. They do show a shot of Bulgy crossing the 3 bridges, but as we all know, the Little Western Gang were incorrectly shown on the Brendam branch frequently in Season 3, so we'll chalk that up to inconsistency. Percy, James, and the fruitful day. James departs Brendam and heads up the branch with the fruit train. He stops at Sudbury to talk to Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle at the station sidings. He breaks down at the logging halt. Percy leaves Lower Sudbury to go help him. He collects his train at the logging halt, and then foolishly crashes the train at the buffers where the double track ends. Well done, Percy. Train stops play. Stepney leaves Knapford Harbor with trucks of hay for the farms up on Thomas's branch line. He heads up Duck's line and stops at Bulgy's bridge to watch the cricketers. He leaves the bridge and gets sent along Thomas's line at Tidmouth. He could have went on either the Harbor line or the Loop line. It doesn't really matter. Caroline catches up with Stepney at the canal. They race neck and neck with each other for a bit until Stepney disappears into Hackenbeck Tunnel. Caroline goes over the hill and finally catches up with him at Hackenbeck. Bullseyes. Daisy leaves Toby at Elsbridge and heads up the branch line. She passes over the crossing where a horse and cart wait for her. She strolls into Hackenbeck and is told of Champion the bull on the line ahead. She goes forward into the second tunnel and pops out on the other side. Champion frightens her, and she reverses back to Hackenbeck to sulk in her shed there. Fish. Henry leaves Knapford Docks with the Flying Kipper. He travels along Duck's Line, past Bulstrode's Beach. Through Tidmouth he goes, and down the loop line to Wellsworth, where Duck awaits to banker him. They leave Wellsworth and begin their ascend up Gordon's Hill, but don't quite make it to the top. And that's everything, folks. That's the map. Like I said before, it's not completely perfect, and I'm sure there will be some people who will want to change some things, and again, that is totally fine. Hell, I will probably want to change some things after hearing feedback from you all. The map is free to use. Feel free to use it to map out your trains or Roblox routes. In the description is a link to download the map in full, and that version is complete with number codes across the whole thing, detailing all the specific sets we just went over. I hope that you all enjoyed this. I enjoyed making it, and who knows, maybe there will be a part 2 in future, where we cover the east side of Sodor. Thank you all as always for watching, folks, and a big thank you to my patrons as always for your continued support. Have a great day, all. I will see you in the next one.